Good evening and welcome to the Chemistry Centre. My name is Matthew Brown and I'm the Head of Communications and Campaigns here at the Royal Society of Chemistry. Tonight's discussion is titled Cosmetics, Chemicals and the Truth, and it's our first joint public event with the Society of Cosmetic Scientists. So I would especially like to give a warm welcome to the President of the Society of Cosmetic Scientists, Barbara Brockway, and the Secretary General, Bettis, and to all of the SCS members who have joined us here tonight. I'd also like to thank Jem and Laura Marshall at the SCS for their hard work in helping to put this event together. And thanks also go to our chair, Alice Hart-Davis, and all of our panellists here tonight for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us in what I'm sure will be a very lively discussion. I'm also delighted to welcome all of you who are watching this live online. I know that this event has been heavily oversubscribed, so I hope that some of the people who weren't able to be here in person are able to watch us online tonight. And online viewers don't have to be left out of the questions either. You can join in, so you can send us questions on Twitter by sending questions to our account, so that's RSC_comms, RSC_COMMS, and using the hashtag RSC Public Lectures. And since we stream the event live, we also make the video available online afterwards, which is going to be particularly helpful for me tonight because unfortunately I have another engagement that, try as I might, I couldn't get out of. So I'm not going to be able to stay, and I do apologise for that, but I am very much looking forward to watching it online at the weekend. So a few domestic notices I need to give out before we start. First of all, a reminder to please turn off your phones or put them into silent mode. We're not expecting a fire drill tonight, so if the alarm goes off, please do evacuate. The route is to go back out the same door that you came in and down the staircase again and out into the courtyard. And if for any reason we can't get out that way, there's an alternative exit here behind the panel. So members of staff from the Royal Society of Chemistry will show you the way out and take us down through the Geological Society out onto Piccadilly. The toilets are on the ground floor where you came in. And you will have found on your seat when you came in a feedback form. Please do fill that in and either leave it in the box outside or take a free post envelope to send it to us. We do, I promise, read every one, and we've used the feedback in the past to improve these events. After the formal event has closed, there is going to be a wine reception in the council room, which will be dead ahead of you when you go out the doors at the back. So please do stay if you'd like to and carry on the debate and discussion over wine and nibbles. And when you do eventually leave at the end of the evening, could I please remind you to leave your name badge at reception because you would not believe how many of them we go through. Finally, I should just let you know about our upcoming public lectures. So on Thursday, the 7th of November, we have Dr. Duncan Campbell, who is a former president of the Association of Public Analysts, and he is going to be talking on fighting food fraud from hassle to horsemeat. And there is actually another lecture before then on the 31st of October where we have Professor Lord Krebs speaking on feeding the 9 billion. But unfortunately that event's proved so popular it's already fully booked. But the reason I mention it is that if you're desperate to get into the room rather than watch it online, you can join the waiting list either by emailing us on events@rsc.org or by speaking to any RSC member of staff here tonight. So, before we start the main event here this evening, the President of the Society of Cosmetic Scientists, Barbara Brockway, has a very pleasant duty to perform, so I'm going to hand over to Barbara to come up to the podium.
Thank you very much indeed. As President of the Society of Cosmetic Scientists, I have the pleasure of thanking John Woodruff for his over 50 years active service with the Society, to thank you for your time on Council, for chairing the Education Committee, your hard work with our distance learning course, and also with the PPCS, which is the Principle and Practice of Cosmetic Sciences, a course that we run every year in Bournemouth. It's with thanks to your hard work that the course has been so successful over the year. So I have the pleasure of presenting you with this scroll. So thank you very much, John.
And obviously you've got quite a few years still left in me. It's all in the genes.
Thank you, Barbara, and congratulations again, John. So, without further ado, it now gives me great pleasure to welcome again Alice Hart-Davis, who is chairing our panel this evening. As you may have already read in your handouts, Alice is an award-winning beauty journalist who writes for many newspapers and magazines. She is also the creator of Good Things Skincare, and with her daughters Molly and Beth, she has written 2 beauty books for teenagers. She tries all manner of products and beauty treatments, it says here, in the name of duty, and relies on hot yoga, physiotherapy, and 5-element acupuncture to keep her sane. Wow. Alice, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. This should be a good debate. On the subject of cosmetics, chemicals, and the truth. It's a thorny and often emotive subject, one I didn't know so much about until about a decade ago when I started writing more about beauty and less about health. And I wrote some piece for the Evening Standard, sufficiently sloppy in its science to move Dr. Chris Flower, who's on our panel, to send me a stern letter saying, "Dear Miss Hart-Davis, most of your so-called facts are deeply inaccurate, but come and see me and we'll have a chat about all this." And he put me straight on a lot of things, and I've been a lot better informed ever since. But during that past decade, we've seen a huge growth in natural and organic beauty, and consequently in the loose talk that goes often along with products in that sector about being chemical-free in terms of cosmetics. I know that's a subject of particular irritation to the scientific-minded people like many of yourselves. And in fact, 5 years ago, it moved the RSC to put a very generous offer on their website of £1 million to anybody who could show them such a thing as a cosmetic-free, chemical-free cosmetic, and that offer still stands. So what do we mean when we're talking about cosmetics and chemicals and the truth? And is it the number of chemicals in a product, whether they're judged to be harsh or harmful, the complexity of the chemicals? I mean, it's an area that's very carefully regulated, isn't it? In which case, why do we all get so worked up about it? But here is our brilliant panel who are going to be talking about all this. I mean, they will introduce themselves when they each come up to speak in turn, but from the end we have Peter Taylor, we have Jayney Goddard, we have Dr. Chris Flower, and we have Joe Fairley. Their biographies are in the handout you have, but they'll say more about who they are and what they think as they come up. So, Peter, would you come and start?
Right, well, thank you very much, Alice, and thank you everybody for coming along. My name's Peter Taylor. I'm a lecturer in Pharmaceutics at Leicester School of Pharmacy. And my background, many years ago, I started off studying pharmacology, which is how drugs and other chemicals work on the body. Following on from that, I went on to do some PhD work in actually trying to get drugs through the skin. So that's where my interest in the interaction between chemicals and the body and also the skin originally started. After a few years formulating in the pharmaceutical industry, so I'm really not coming from the cosmetic industry originally, I started lecturing, and over the last 10, maybe 12, 15 years, I've been moving more and more heavily into cosmetic science teaching and the principles behind it. Now the title, Cosmetics, Chemicals and the Truth, if we ask that as a question, what is the truth? It's a huge question. You know, it's been rightly identified. What actually are we trying to talk about here? And really, I don't think that I could make much of an inroad into actually providing that truth. What I can do is talk about some of the tools, some of the questions that you need to ask and which consumers should ask in order to get to the truth. There's obviously concern out there, but I think, and quite a lot of my colleagues will agree, that the concern comes about because they're only getting partial bits of information or it's out of context. And it's really the context which is very important. And I think if we're looking primarily at safety of cosmetics, cosmetics as a whole are very safe materials. But that's what concerns people, potential harm from them. And it's very easy to frighten people by talking about hazards, the hazards from the chemicals, the ingredients in the products. But that's not the whole story. It's not even much of the story. And if I may borrow your glass of water. Hazard is a start of things. We've got a glass of water there. Water in itself is not a very hazardous material. It's essential to life. And I think we'd say most of us that is safe. Well, it is safe to a degree. Drink that glass of water, it's probably not going to do anything to you. It'll make you feel maybe a little bit better, a little bit more refreshed. If you try and inhale that water, different story. Then it changes into something which is risky because we can't inhale water. We will drown. So that's potentially risky. And what we're looking at then is the inherent hazard which is low, but then how you give the chemical to the body. Now, we're not talking about inhaling anything here. We're talking about applying it to the skin. If you're feeling thirsty and you want to take some water, lying in a bath of water is not going to help. The water will not absorb through the skin. So there we've not only moved away from the hazard providing a very, very low risk. Actually, the water isn't doing anything because the skin is a barrier. So we have the hazard, we have how you give the chemical to the body. We've also got a concept of how much chemical you give to the body. And if you drink enough water, it will be harmful. And Chris was coming up with some figures earlier. If you drink quite a few litres of water, it can be very harmful to you. So we've got the concept of dose. But again, that's a very, very large amount of water to drink. If you drink a thimbleful, it's not going to have any harm. And chemicals in cosmetic products tend to be present in low concentrations, in low amounts. Now, we can only stretch the water analogy so far, but we've identified three things which contribute to risk: hazard, route of exposure, and the, if you like, the dose. The other thing is, how long will you be exposed for? And I know that there are some products which people get concerned about, but you need to look at the context. A lot of shower gels, shampoos, bath products are wash-off products. They're not designed for you to sort of smear it all over your body and leave it there all day. You're in a shower, it's being washed off. So we also have to look at how long you expose the body to the particular chemical for and how frequently you do that. So by this time, we've moved a long, long way from the original potential hazard. But unfortunately, that's all that tends to be reported is, well, studies have shown that this is hazardous. And actually, quite often, what studies have shown is this has some sort of activity in some sort of very obscure model, not in real life. The final point is actually what does the body do to the ingredient? If, by any chance, anything does get absorbed, the body doesn't just lie there and let it do its work. The body will actually treat deal with the chemical. And evolution has provided us with systems of actually getting rid of external chemicals. So there'll be lots of ways in which the body can metabolize different chemicals if they get inside and excrete them. So when you add all of this up, we've moved from hazards which sound quite frightening to risks. Well, actually, usually they're very, very, very low. And on that note, I'll finish and hope that's given people some things to think about. And next time they see a press report, think about all of those things rather than just one of them. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jayney Goddard, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you for this fascinating debate. I was really excited when I read the topic, because it's something that's actually very, very dear to my heart, not just as a writer, but also actually as a consumer. So just a little bit of introduction. I'm president of the Complementary Medical Association. That's the CMA. It's the world's largest professional membership body for very highly qualified complementary medical practitioners. And we're a global organization, and a lot of that's my day job. A lot of the work I also do is working as a health writer, and I also do a lot of teaching around the world, predominantly at medical schools for the faculty and students on the evidence base for my field, complementary medicine. In a nutshell, complementary medicine is anything that has a essentially holistic approach that can safely and sensibly and sanely be used alongside conventional medicine. So from that, you will gather that what we're about is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In fact, we are known within our organization to take this incredibly measured approach and to really try to weigh things up from an evidence-based perspective as best we can. So, within the Complementary Medical Association, we have a phenomenal website with something like 6,500 pages of very, very well researched and referenced information about all manner of health issues, health concerns, and so on. And because of that, as you can imagine, we get a lot of traffic, around about 650,000 to 1 million hits a month, which is an awful lot. So you can imagine that generates a lot of questions. And a lot of questions that we get center around what's safe. What can I safely use? Now, also with my other hat on as a health writer, I tend to write on natural health subjects, particularly in the natural anti-aging category, dare I say it. And again, I get lots and lots of emails and letters from people saying, hey, Jayney, is it safe for me to use this particular cream? Should I be going for something more natural? Is it going to harm me if I don't? And the truth is that I've been trying to find the answer, and it's actually really, really difficult, isn't it? You see, when you consider that the average woman, the best guesstimate is that the average woman, and I can't speak for gentlemen, but the average woman is exposed to something like 500 plus chemicals, synthetic chemicals, per day on average, possibly more. And so the trend, because people, there is this certain sense of alarm out there. Well, should we really be exposed to this many chemicals? So the trend is undoubtedly towards a more natural approach. We see that not just within the cosmetics industry, but also, of course, within the food business as well, within nutrition. So the trend is growing for a more natural kind of organic type of approach. And of course, there is a long history of usage of those types of product. But of course, it's really important, and I stress this an awful lot, that just because something is natural doesn't actually mean to say that it's safe. Everything is a chemical. And we shouldn't ever lose sight of that. So this argument of chemicals, well, we have to ask, well, really, what is a chemical? So I suppose really what I'm doing is coming down on looking at synthetic chemicals. Perhaps that's how we should maybe think of this and phrase it. So the situation with non-synthetics or natural chemicals or naturally derived products, they have been used for thousands of years in many, many cases. And so there is actually a something of a database of successful, safe usage. And the problem with these synthetic chemicals is there's just less time, or less duration of use. And so because these things have only been used in recent years, do we have enough of a database of safety? And of course, then that brings into the question, things like dose dependence. How often are we using these things? How do we metabolize things? We're all individuals, let's face it. We all actually metabolize things in different ways. So when you consider that we simply don't always even know metabolic pathways. So there are lots and lots of questions. So when people say to me, hey, Jayney, is it safe for me to use X, Y, Z? I had to go to the literature. And I actually have to put my hand up and say, I'm deeply confused and very deeply conflicted. Because on one hand, I will read one paper that tells me that parabens were found in breast cancer tissues. But those same parabens were also found in the non-cancerous cells as well. So which side do we come down on? And it's all very open to interpretation. My rule of thumb, I suppose, for me as a consumer is if I'm happy to maybe eat a product, I would also perhaps be happy to put it on my body. I think that's my rule of thumb that I'm coming down to at the moment. It may sound crazy, but that's, it may not taste so great, but if it's not going to actually do me harm if I ingest it, then putting it on my skin is not such a bad bet. What we also have to think about, of course, is safety testing. When we're looking at synthetic chemicals, how can we ethically safety test those on humans? That's something that we really have to ask ourselves. Because generally speaking, if you have a novel substance, it's actually pretty difficult to get enough of a length of time to actually ascertain whether that genuinely is long-term safe. So we've got to ask that question as well. Again, I'm very deeply conflicted on that because there are ways of doing it, but there are always so many open-ended questions there as well. And the other issue that a lot of people ask me about is the environmental impact that synthetics actually make. When we're thinking about sort of liquid plastics, for example, what is that doing to the environment? Paraffins and so on. So those are the questions, again, that I'm being asked. And when I'm looking at cosmetics and so on from a more natural source, those sorts of issues don't tend to come up so much unless people are using endangered sources. So sandalwood, for example, is a good example of those. So to wrap up, as I say, I'm presenting with lots of questions because I think I'm almost representing a consumer perspective in many, many ways. So what I want to know is what's in these substances. Are they actually safe? I'm not sure because I can read one paper that tells me that they are and one paper that tells me that they're not. So actually, maybe if the companies using the synthetic chemicals in their products want to assure the consumer, like me, that these things are safe, the onus is actually on them to do so. So I would actually love to wrap up by saying I would like to see more evidence. I would like to see more research, perhaps just to set my mind at rest, but also to help me as a health writer and a lecturer and a speaker to actually help those people that are asking me those questions. Thank you very much.
Right, well, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you've heard, I'm Chris Flower, and I'm the Director General of CTPA, which is the Cosmetic, Toiletry and Perfumery Association, which is the trade association for the UK cosmetic manufacturers. I've been with CTPA since 1996, and for their sins, they made me the Director General in 2003. Prior to that, I spent 25 years in industry assessing the safety of a lot of consumer products, cosmetics, toiletries, even some medicines, even some household products, including adhesives. So a bit of variety there. My background is in biology. I qualified as a chartered biologist in 1976. I'm giving away all my secrets here about my age. And I subsequently studied for MSc and PhD degrees in toxicology. I'm married. I've got 2 children. And 2 grandchildren. And I think that's important because I can assure you that everything I say and do with respect to the safety of cosmetic products and their ingredients is done in the knowledge that my wife, my children and grandchildren may use those products. And if that gives me the slightest concern, then I shouldn't be supporting that ingredient or that product. Anyway, I'm pleased to be here this evening to present to you the case which I can best describe as chemicals, friend or foe, and how to describe the difference. Sorry, how to decide the difference. A slip of the tongue there, which is quite important. How to decide the difference. There's a saying that all medicines are dangerous, but some may also be useful. In exactly the same way, there are no safe chemicals, only safe ways of using them. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a bit, because, as you've heard, we must remember that everything in the known universe is made of chemicals. I am 100% chemical, as are my clothes, this auditorium, and even the air in it that we're breathing. It's all chemical because chemicals are everything everywhere. Some are made by man in laboratories or factories. Some are made by plants, which are little more than chemical factories making thousands of chemicals. And that enables them to grow, to produce flowers, to create wonderful perfumes, and to be coloured. They're all chemicals. Some are made by animals like ourselves as we grow, as we digest our food and turn it into different chemicals, as we metabolize one chemical into another, whether it's something we've absorbed from our food or whether it's a medicine we've taken, or indeed something that we may have swallowed inadvertently. And some are made in the environment by sunlight, by oxidation, and even by lightning strikes and fires. So the question, therefore, is not whether we should use chemicals in cosmetics, because every one of those ingredients is a chemical product. In every cosmetic product is a chemical. But how do we ensure that our use of chemicals as ingredients is safe, which is indeed the question that we've heard already this evening. Well, first, we must rid ourselves of the false idea that natural substances are intrinsically safe. And I'm not anti-natural, far from it. The first medicines, of course, were natural products, and indeed the natural sector of the cosmetics industry is growing rapidly. And I'm very happy about that because it increases our membership, it increases consumer choice. It's a great thing. But nature has all the best poisons, and there are plenty of examples of the natural world of substances you really wouldn't want to take. But of course, we've developed some pretty toxic substances ourselves, such as antibiotics. And if you don't think they're toxic, ask a bacterium. So how do we decide which chemical is safe and which one is not? And it was a question that was as old as science itself, and it was asked by a chap who goes under the wonderful name of Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. But he operated under the pen name of Paracelsus in the 16th century, probably because it took too much space to write his full name. But he said, if everything is a poison, if all substances are poison, how on earth am I going to differentiate the poisons from the remedies, from the safe ones? Well, he thought about it and he said, the answer, which he wrote in Latin as being the lingua franca of the day in science, was dosis solar facet venenum, or the dose alone makes the poison. In other words, you can have a safe dose of something and you can have a toxic dose of something. It's the amount you take, or the dose, which determines the outcome. And that was true in the 16th century, and it's still true today. We heard earlier about water and some figures. About 10 litres of water in an evening will probably kill you. But 10 litres of beer containing the same amount of water won't kill you, even though you might feel that you've died the next morning. So it's my excuse for drinking beer rather than water when I get the chance. But another example, botulism toxin, made by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum. It's the most toxic chemical known to man and perfectly natural. It is exquisitely toxic. About 100 nanograms will kill an adult. So a tablet the size of an aspirin contains enough toxin to kill every single man, woman and child on Earth. That's how toxic that stuff is. Yet some people deliberately inject the same stuff into their face. The slightest error And well, you get the picture. Exposure below the toxic dose result happiness. Exposure above the toxic dose result misery. It's a sort of play on words from, I think it's Mr. Micawber, I think, from Charles Dickens, who was talking about income and expenditure, where if your income is below your expenditure, the result is happiness, but if your income is above your expenditure, your result is misery. Another example is common table salt. We add it to food, makes it taste nicer, and it used to preserve foods before we had refrigerators. We need salt in our diet to survive and to replace that that's lost in sweat. It's essential for the work of our nerves, and if they don't work properly, we won't live long. But a teaspoonful of salt in a glass of water, drink that, and unless you are very sick quickly, it could easily kill you. And yet over a week or a month, we will consume a lot more than 1 tablespoonful of salt. So the same principle applies to every single one of the countless thousands of chemicals we take in every day. And don't forget, our skin is a barrier, not a sieve. We don't absorb much through it, as we've heard, and certainly not the 60% often quoted. So we first need to find out what is it that the chemical might do that could cause a problem. What are its intrinsic properties? What are its hazards? Then, under what circumstances will it produce that? In other words, inhaling water is a lot worse than drinking it. We have then identified the hazards and characterised them. We need to know whether those circumstances will arise in the way that we propose to use the chemical. We need to know our exposure, because then we can determine the risk, because risk equals hazard times exposure. If exposure is 0, the risk is 0, no matter how alarming the exposure may be. And it's for this reason we can use many chemicals, whether they're man-made or natural, in complete safety, because the exposure, even under the worst case scenario, is so far below that needed for the hazardous properties to appear. As I say, exposure below toxic dose result happiness, exposure above toxic dose result misery. Thank you.
Evening, everybody. My name's Jo Fairley. I am co-author of the Beauty Bible. I also, wearing a completely random other hat, founded Green and Black's Organic Chocolate. And I'm delighted to be here tonight. It's an incredibly complicated subject that we're discussing. And I probably understand that as well as anybody in this room, because for 8 years, I also chaired the Soil Association's Health and Beauty Products Standards Committee. Delighted to see 2 of my former members in the room. And we had countless sessions gnawing over, the toxicity or otherwise, or the potential impact on the environment of the production process of ingredients that we were being asked to approve or not. Beauty Bible has also put me in an incredibly privileged position. Since we launched our first book in 1996, I've now had over 20,000 women trying products for me and giving me their feedback, not just on the products, but their concerns about cosmetics, etc. And actually, it's that reader, it's that beauty consumer, which I feel really has to come first at all times. Rather like my other panelists, I don't believe that all chemicals are toxic or harmful. I'm very keen on water, very keen on salt, etc. And I'm extremely disapproving of the way that certain publications have demonized, I'm mentioning the Daily Mail here, even though I do work for them, but have demonized ingredients like parabens and sodium lauryl sulfate, etc. And I listen to my readers who tell me that they genuinely believe, in some cases, that they will get cancer if they use these ingredients, which is clearly preposterous, but that feeling is out there. I do have some personal issues with chemicals. I'm an environmentalist. I prefer if my ingredients in what I use on my hair and my body, etc., have come from sustainable agricultural sources. I believe too, like Jayney, that there are many ingredients which have been proven over the years, you know, back to the wise woman tradition and the mists of time beyond, to have therapeutic properties. And personally, I would rather turn to something like calendula if I've got dry, itchy skin than something like sodium lauryl sulfate, which is a known irritant and yet is still incorporated into aqueous cream, which is the go-to ingredient, the go-to product prescribed by GPs for dry, itchy, eczematic skin. It has, however, always seemed to me a little bit unfair, the hoops that the natural cosmetic industry and the organic cosmetic industry have to jump through to prove what they don't put in their products. And actually to trace those ingredients all the way back to the field that they came from. It just seems to me instinctively that the burden of proof here is somewhat topsy-turvy. And so what I'd really like to see is a move towards clearer labelling with the consumer in mind. The simple fact that everything has to be labelled in Latin leads many consumers to believe that everything on the back is a synthetic chemical, because by the time you've translated it into Latin, that's what it looks like. I actually spend half my day with a magnifying glass, sometimes a microscope, looking at the ingredients list on the back of products. And, so if it's really hard for me to make head or tail what's in the jar, then what chance has the consumer got? So I think, if I could wave my magic wand over Brussels, for instance, which obviously governs the labelling issues, what I'd like to see is an ingredients list that just made it clearer. Maybe we have the naturally sourced ingredients in bold and the synthetic chemicals in light type or whatever. And, again, I completely understand this is a very grey area, because a lot of products, a lot of natural ingredients are transformed through techniques like ethoxylation and hydrogenation, etc., into something quite other. I would also like it to be mandatory for nanoparticles, which are certainly very novel in terms of cosmetic ingredients, to be labelled so that consumers could understand if they were in there. And I would like also for all, because due to this size issue, I think it should be mandatory for every single product produced by every single company to be listed on their own websites with all ingredients listed there, so that people can actually find out what's in things. And so it's really just about, and you can have the English translations then, because there's room for them. So it's all really about educating the consumer, and also my fellow journalists, who occasionally are very sloppy and who really don't know a lot about this whole area. When it comes to ingredient safety, I would like safety data from trials to mirror that of the drugs industry, which now requires that not just the kind of best results are published, but actually, all results for those ingredients. And I would really like it to be easier for consumers to actually access information about safety data. At the moment, just about the only place that anybody can turn to for this kind of information is the Environmental Working Group's Cosmetic Safety Database, which frankly nobody in this country even knows exists. I think my other concern is about the lobbying that goes on by the chemicals industry, which potentially impacts on manufacturers of naturals. Naturals can't be patented, and drug companies and chemical companies hate ingredients that they can't patent. And as somebody, next year I'm launching something called the Perfume Society, which is actually the first perfume appreciation society in the world, and I'm spending quite a lot of time at the moment talking to perfumers. They lament the fact that the International Fragrance Association, which governs which ingredients are safe to use, have sort of gradually eroded the percentages of many natural ingredients because of minuscule risks of sensitivity to them. You know, these guys have the challenge of constantly reformulating existing fragrances to meet those changing, goalposts, basically. And, you know, their belief is that this is lobbying very often on the part of the chemicals companies, which is pushing for these natural ingredients to be reduced in percentage. That this is what they tell me. So I'm not against chemicals. You know, I don't want anybody taking the aldehydes out of my beloved Chanel No. 22. But my issues with the cosmetic chemicals industry are to do with sustainability, the fairness or unfairness of labelling for the consumer, which I think put natural manufacturers at a disadvantage, and the unfairness of lobbying on the part of the chemicals industry, which seeks to basically own everything that we put on our skin when nature has some really glorious, fragrant, but entirely unpatentable alternatives. So I'm all for truth, so long as it really does mean greater openness, clarity, and honesty, and genuinely putting the consumer rather than profit first. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Jo. Thank you, Chris, Jayney, and Peter. We now come to the point where you can all ask questions. I hope people have got questions for the panel on all these subjects. We've heard about everything from hazard and dose to the concerns of real people in labelling. Now, there are microphones roving around the room, and when you've got a question, when a microphone reaches you, you can introduce yourself, say who you are, though you don't have to, and do please hold the microphone.
Nice if they did.
It would be great if you did. Thank you, Jo. And hold the microphone, I'm told, very close to your mouth when you're speaking, as being demonstrated over here, so that we can all hear what you're asking. Great. So somebody had their hand up over here.
Thank you very much. I'm Barbara Olioso. I'm a chemist. I'm a member of the RSC, and I'm the founder of Forest Secret Skincare. I have a question for Chris Flower. You mentioned Paracelsus and the fact that he used to say the quantity makes the poison. He stated that back in the 1600s, where there were only natural chemicals. But nowadays, human technology have created new chemicals which nature cannot handle. So my question is, what about all these silicones or non-biodegradable chemicals that we release day after day into the environment? Are we creating a poison, a time bomb poison for the environment that goes beyond the questions, the daily exposure is safe? I'm also talking about the environment we live in. Are we releasing all these chemicals which will have God knows what impact on the health of our environment? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. I think that the question, if you like, is in two parts. One was whether or not this is a problem for us as individuals, in that these are new chemicals and can our bodies handle them? And then secondly, can the environment handle these new substances as we make them? On the first part, yes, our bodies can handle them. We use the same mechanisms, the same metabolic processes to handle any substance. It doesn't matter whether it's a new one or an old one, because the chemical groupings that are attacked by our enzymes are identifiable and the processes are known. The consequences may be good or bad for the individual depending on the dose, but the principle remains the same. When it comes to the environment, I think that humanity is learning an awful lot, and that we are improving our understanding of the consequences of what we have done in the past. And I think there's a lot more emphasis now going into thinking about what happens to the ingredients we're using now, whether it's a cosmetic, a cleaning product, or anything else. The fibres from our clothes, when we wash them, go down the drain and are then picked up by mussels in the North Sea. All of these things we're beginning to understand that we used to take for granted in the past, and we can't anymore. There are too many people on the planet to live as we used to. We've got to think again. So we don't have the answers, but we are aware that the questions need to be looked at, and we need to come up with answers if we are to have a sustainable way of life in future.
Can I just add something there, which is that every time we looked at an ingredient on the Soil Association committee, we actually had to look at data on bioaccumulation, biodegradability, etc., so that an organic ingredient could not be included if it didn't actually pass the environmental tests as well. And I think that's something that's very little known about organic certification, is that many of those ingredients have been through that screening process to ensure that they are not polluting in their own right.
I wanted just to comment on the evidence that about these chemicals get processed the same way a natural would be processed by the human body. And what evidence is there? Because as far as I'm aware, for example, the absorption through the skin is usually measured on the rat model, but rat is a different animal which is very tough in comparison to human. So how do you make sure, that you have a good model that's comparable to what happens in a human body? And also, how do you know, what evidence do you have that the enzymes in my skin are going really to process this chemical if you don't know how much is absorbed through my skin? Because you have just a theoretical model, but what is really the evidence of that?
Again, two parts to it. One is how much goes through the skin, and we've heard that essentially the skin is a pretty good barrier. We are able to, you're right, the rat skin is relatively porous by comparison. Things will go through rat skin and rabbit skin much more easily. And we now have artificial systems which closely mimic the human skin. We even have manufactured skin from cells, which again will mimic the same barrier properties. So we can actually reasonably easily predict how much will get through the skin. But then having got into the skin, or whether it has been absorbed from our food, or whether we've inhaled a chemical, the mechanisms that we have in our body will tackle everything and anything. These processes are pretty well documented in textbooks, and they haven't changed over thousands of years. We are able to metabolize everything that gets in there, with very, very few exceptions. And these are the ones which we know about, things like dioxin, which can accumulate in the body because they're very difficult to metabolize, but we know why they're difficult. Is that?
Thank you.
Any other questions? At the back?
Okay, I don't have a question, I have a point I'd like to make. My name's Dean Godfrey, and I'm not going to mention parabens.
Okay.
The argument that naturals have been used for thousands of years and have a long history of safe use actually doesn't stand scrutiny. If you go back 2,000 years, the population of the planet was a few millions. We now have 7 billion people. And in the last 50 years of exposure to synthetic cosmetic chemicals, the overall exposure is probably greater. And to exemplify that, the MHRA, or MRHA, have recently issued a warning about some Chinese herbal medicines because they contain a carcinogen. So, and they've been used for thousands of years, but there is a carcinogen present. And I still won't mention parabens.
Thank you. Would anybody like to comment on the panel?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to support that point, Dean. The idea that traditional is good is not necessarily a good idea. For one thing, the things that tended to kill people tend to disappear from view, and because people can't see that, they don't recognise that there were these harmful chemicals. But it's also the nature of the evidence that comes up, and because so-called synthetic chemicals are new, therefore we don't have as many years well, that's true. What we do have is a lot more scientific knowledge and a lot more testing for them now. So, you know, there isn't a gap in knowledge just because they're new, relatively
Thank
new.
you. I feel Jo will have something to say.
What I would say is that, as far as I know, there's not a single study so far of the synergistic effect of different chemicals. They are currently all studied in isolation, and as we know, some ingredients will make the skin more, you know, for example, SLS will make it more likely to absorb other ingredients. So I think it's, you know, there is a huge amount of data out there about individual ingredients, but I think everybody would welcome more research into synergistic blends of things.
So there could be a problem there simply because of the sheer number of possible interactions.
Yes.
The pharmaceutical industry has a trouble because it is now required to test medicines assuming that somebody is drinking alcohol or one or two other mixtures that may exist. But this is not a new problem. Our diet has consisted of mixtures of chemicals forever, and there are thousands of them as a natural component of our food. And the body is pretty good at separating these out and dealing them one at a time. But I do accept that there is the possibility of additive effects. If two or more substances have the same effect in the body, then they can either be additive or they could be synergistic if they work through different pathways that make one pathway more prone to damage than the other because of both being operating at the same time. Or there is even the possibility that they may cancel one another out. There is research in this area, there are publications, but the complexity is such that we can't do it all in one go.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, I was going to just add on the back of that, so we come back and say, Jo, Jayney, do you think that part of the problem is that we use so many cosmetic products these days that creates this complexity in a way that it simply wouldn't have done in the past?
I suppose my opinion really on that would be yes, certainly we are, Alice. However, of course, we're also exposed to this gamut of other synthetic cosmetics, cleaning products, that beautiful new car smell that we love so much. There's just so much in the environment that surrounds us. So this issue about this, that, as you were saying, Jo, that if you're adding one synthetic on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, really what does happen? Is there a synergy? Or do we reach a critical mass at some stage? And who's to say what that could be? We simply don't know. We simply don't have the data. But how on earth can we even begin to do that science? The permutations and the numbers of studies we'd have to run would just be astronomical.
Thank you. Dean, you had something else to add? I'll come to you in a sec.
I'm not against natural, let me make that clear. I'm against the arguments sometimes used in favour of natural, because I can turn that argument back on you. Today, people are bringing natural ingredients from Australia, from the Amazon, from all other parts of the world and putting them together where they have never been used in those combinations before. So you can't use the argument for synthetics and exclude naturals. They are being used in unnatural combinations. Who knows what interactions are being caused there? And the naturals are far more complex and there are more chemicals. If you want to talk about numbers of chemicals, which actually, quite frankly, and I'm sorry, but it's irrelevant, we go back to the dose, not the number, but there are far more numbers of different chemicals in different combinations in naturals. I still haven't mentioned parabens.
Yeah. I think also I'm concerned sometimes about the amount of time that something is tested for. And I would take the parallel of hydrogenated fat in food, which, for many years the food industry was saying was much, much better for men's hearts, not mentioning any particular brand in particular. And my husband, who created a non-hydrogenated margarine, was taken to task by the Advertising Standards Authority for suggesting that hydrogenated fat was a bad thing. But he was taken to court by Flora, who were very busy at that point reformulating their product to remove the hydrogenated fat. And it is now very widely acknowledged that hydrogenated fat, which was seen as a great thing, is actually much more linked with heart disease than natural fats. And so, you know, I just think that everything is very new that we're talking about here. And 2 years even of safety data is possibly not enough in the long term to show what the long-term effects are.
Thank you. Question on this side.
Hi, Tony Gaskell, 40 years in the chemical industry. At first hand, I've seen the amount of effort and expense that went into developing the European REACH system and the MSDS and the publicly available information. And the fact that the chemical industry has attempted to put its house in order through REACH. I guess 2 questions or comments. One, I'd be very disappointed if that had not had some beneficial effect on the personal care industry and on the safety, or at least the image of the products that go in there. If not, I've spent millions of dollars on a complete waste of effort.
Who would like to comment?
Well, certainly people have different views on REACH and the time and effort that it has involved, but there's no doubt, no, well, I say no, perhaps afterwards, but certainly there's no doubt that it has resulted in the gathering together of the available information on many, many thousands of chemicals. Of course that information is then available to us if we're using those in formulating a cosmetic product. And, you know, we certainly do not ignore that information. If there are concerns there, you don't use it. The law requires that we must be able to show that the cosmetic is safe before it's placed on the market. There's no, well, it's probably okay. It has to be safe. We have to be able to demonstrate it's safe. And sometimes, you know, the concerns that are raised are over minuscule risks that would only arise under circumstances that are not related to its use in cosmetics. But nevertheless, if people are concerned, then we have to arrive at a forum like this, answer those questions and talk to people about their issues and concerns. If I might, you know, as I'm turned on, just briefly mention nano, because you raised it, Joe, and your concern over the labelling. I can reassure you that the law now says if you have a nanoparticle or a nanomaterial in a cosmetic, then on the label, after the name, in brackets, has to be the little word nano. And that's true across the whole of Europe. So if it doesn't say nano, there isn't a nanomaterial in there. If it does, then it is.
Very good.
But you can be reassured that it's there because we know it's safe. If we didn't put it in.
So, Chris, when is that nano directive coming in?
It's in place now.
Okay,
yes,
so does everybody then have to
July.
read their packaging?
But there will be a grace period on packaging.
Strictly speaking, no.
Okay.
It was the 11th of July. I'm looking at a nod from the back there. The 11th of July this year. If you have a nanomaterial, then you have to have nano after the name on the pack. Of course, you might find 1 or 2 sort of products that are lying around on shelves, but strictly speaking, those are not compliant with the legislation today.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, as a journalist, I would encourage the industry, your industry, since it's, you know, you are mostly scientists in the room, to spend a lot more time and resources on educating journalists who are the kind of vectors to the public of,
yes, please.
You know, Alice and I sit in various presentations where usually Alice and I are the only people asking questions.
You ask questions, but the difficulty is...
Literally. And there is there's a contingent of extremely young beauty journalists who have zero knowledge about this whole area. And I would suggest that a series of, forums where you get those young women together in a room and start to try to explain the case to them would be money well spent.
And yes, and to start with the basics and never underestimate how little we know. I mean, I find the difficulty in writing about this whole area is I only know what I'm told by all the people who want to tell me stuff, and those are always brands, manufacturers who want to tell me how brilliant their own product is, whether it's the latest high-tech thing, whether it's a natural, and it's only by very slowly putting all those fragments together in a big old jigsaw that it starts to make sense, and because clearly not everybody can be right at the same time, but it's hard for me to know that. So to have any kind of independent view brought to bear on how I should begin to filter some of this information and consider it. And, I've been doing this quite a long time, as Jo says, there's a lot of people who haven't, and bloggers who
and we
say
do
anything.
scratch beneath the surface,
Yeah, but it's slow and uphill work. Now, there was a question down in the middle here.
Hi. My name's Rachel. I'm a student doing cosmetic science. My question's for Chris. I've literally just had my first lecture on toxicology today, so you'll have to bear with me. But basically, when we're formulating a product, we use different, the ingredients have different levels of impurities. And my question to you is, does it matter? Does it make a difference? The more pure it is it better for your skin than what if it was impure? Because it doesn't say on packaging what sort of purity it is that they've used.
There is a general requirement that, of course, you would use the purest quality available because you then know what you're putting in. It's not an absolute requirement, of course, but there are guidelines, there is best practice, and the real question is, what are the impurities? If you don't know, then it's best to err on the safety side and buy a better quality ingredient. If you know that those impurities are actually perfectly harmless, then that apparently lower grade doesn't matter. That might sound contradictory, but what I'm thinking of here, for example, is when we're buying a detergent for making a shampoo, you can buy extremely pure detergents, but they're phenomenally expensive. Or you can buy a broader cut, which contains the detergent that you want, plus a little bit of the ones either side. It's a lot less expensive. You know that those other ingredients are perfectly safe, and it's perfectly okay to use that mix in your product. So it will be a matter of horses for courses. I hope that explains it.
I find as a journalist, I'm often amazed when trying to work out what some of the chemicals are on those little lists at the back of the packet. I will refer to the internet, where I often end up on manufacturers' websites and can see the price of these ingredients, which can vary enormously from, there was something I was looking up this morning, it was between $25 and about $2,000. And you think, wow, that is a big spread of stuff, and maybe does that affect the efficacy, the purity? I mean, it must be all of those and more. But again, I don't know, and I don't always have the time when writing a story to go into that kind of detail. But yeah, it all impacts, doesn't it?
As I've got the microphone.
Go on, go on then.
I think that's a good example because we had a lecture here some time ago, and rose perfume came up.
Oh.
Yep. And as you know, the finest quality rose oil is phenomenally expensive, and there's a tiny amount available in the whole world. It's been analysed, and it's got something over 200 individual chemicals in it. It will vary slightly depending on whether you've harvested the petals before or after dawn, and how long it's been before you've harvested them and processed them. So it's a very complex material. But about 90% of the smell of the rose comes from about 5 of those ingredients, which can easily be synthesized and manufactured so that most people can enjoy a rose-scented product, whether it's a cosmetic or something else. And in my case, I couldn't tell the difference. And The artificial one is a lot less expensive and, again, is perfectly okay for the majority of cases. But if you're making a fine fragrance, you will probably use the very best quality and take the cost hit, as it were. If I might also mention the ingredient labelling, because it's come up a couple of times. I do understand that people are frustrated when they see aqua instead of water and milk instead of honey. The reason for that is that we have a single labelling system across the whole of Europe. And if we didn't adopt some language-neutral way of describing common ingredients, we would have had to have translated all of those into all of the languages in Europe, and the labels would have been much, much harder to read than they are now. So, and I know you know these things, but it is a pain for people not to know that aqua is water and so on.
But there is no reason why it shouldn't be mandatory for every single cosmetic to be listed on that brand's local website in that country with the translation. I can see no reason why there would be an objection to that at all.
It would be a burden on small companies. Large companies could do it, of course.
Well, they've all got websites.
Maybe.
They've got to put the ingredients on the back of their packaging.
There's nothing stopping them doing it.
No, but I would like to see that information more readily available to the consumer without them having to sit with a microscope on their desk, which I do, or a magnifying glass anyway.
There's a...
Well, as I think a lot of people in the room know, the purpose of the ingredient list is for alerting people with allergens to individual compounds. So uniform labelling, even if it's in a language that most people don't understand, is not only not a problem, that's exactly what you need. I'm just wondering what you think consumers are going to do with all this information you want to give to them. I mean, I'm Colin Sanders from Colin's Beauty Pages, by the way. I get a lot of people sort of writing into my blog asking questions about things, and they don't generally seem to be scared or frightened. They just seem to be deeply confused, and I'm not at all sure that the overwhelming majority of people even want that information, and certainly I don't think very many people know what to do with it when they get it, apart from asking me questions on my blog. What is the purpose of giving these people
I'm not saying that most people will want to know. In the same way that, most journalists in a room at a press launch don't ask questions. However, I don't think that that's a reason for not making the information more clearly available. I think people can do with it exactly what they like. They can look up things on the cosmetic safety database. They could perhaps do their own little bit of analysis if they have an ongoing sensitivity to cosmetics, do a little bit of detective work themselves, going, oh, actually, I realise that I've been using lots and lots of different things that have got geranium oil in, and they might go, well, maybe that's the ingredient that I'm sensitive to. If they want to, in the same way that if you were keeping a food diary, you would keep a record of what you'd eaten on different days, and you would try to look for patterns. Okay, I've had wheat on all those different days and I got a bloated stomach. So I think you can't tell people, you can't say what people might like to do with the information, but I don't think that's a reason for not making it available.
Well, literally the last question I had on my blog was from someone who'd used a lipstick which had a preservative in, which they had a reaction to. So literally the last question I had on my blog was from someone who'd used a formulation which they'd had a reaction to, which they previously had no problem with, and they contacted the manufacturer and asked them, and they were given false information because the...
False information?
Yeah, quite unconsciously, because the formulation had changed, and when they looked back at their old packaging, they found that the information they wanted was on the pack, but it wasn't available from the company because they had no pack. And so are you going to keep every website up to date with every batch that's...
Well, I mean...
It's a lot harder than you're suggesting there. And it totally escapes me as to what...
If they've got to change their packaging, then there's no reason they can't change their website at the same time. And my other issue would be that the fact that most people throw away the box before they've used the product, so they can't actually find out what's in a lot of things anyway, because the the ingredient list is, in many, many cases, trust me, not on the product itself, but only on the outer packaging.
And just because you don't get asked the question, it could just be simply a demographic issue, because I know that we are asked the questions, and so clearly people aren't just asking questions for, to waste their own time. There is a reason there, and it probably is, as Joe suggests, that people are concerned about sensitivities and concerned about things that may, they believe affect them.
But sensitivities are a totally different issue to safety. I mean, everybody...
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you, actually.
Well, anybody can develop a sensitivity to anything, any time, so every chemical that's ever existed is a potential sensitizer.
But the point I'm making is that just because you are not asked the questions doesn't mean to say that people don't want this information, because we certainly are asked the questions. So it may just simply be that our audience is somewhat different to yours. So because of that, it doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't give this information at all. As Joe quite rightly says, it's not a big deal to put your ingredient list on your website. It's simply a cut and paste job, actually, if you've put it on your products.
Yes, I'm not saying it's a difficult thing to do. I'm just questioning
why.
What on earth, what on earth possible purpose it can serve to
because they want the information.
Other than the very curious people here.
Yes, they're curious because they're aware, concerned consumers.
And because 63% of people in this country self-report as having sensitive skin. So there are a huge number of people out there trying to identify what possibly could be creating a problem.
Well, thank you. We've got a couple of questions at the back, Barbara, before we come back to you. So when we have time, I would also like to ask Colin what you most often get asked on your site, but can we come back to that? And I know parabens is a
down, Dean, down.
Right, sorry, who was that with the question at the back that wasn't Dean?
Hi, I'm Emma Meredith. I actually work with Chris at the CTPA, and really I'm just giving Chris the opportunity to perhaps talk about the safety assessment. You were a safety assessor, and perhaps that will help to respond to Jayney's question, and also the questions that you get asked a lot by your consumers on your website, visitors, so that they can have confidence in the product, irrespective of what the ingredient is. Perhaps you might want to explain that, Chris. Sorry.
I think yes, because many people don't appreciate just how much work goes into becoming a safety assessor. It's not something that you can do because you think it's a nice idea, or I quite fancy signing a few documents and being paid for it. In my own case, as I say, I was doing it for 25 years, and there's nothing quite like signing a document in your own personal capacity, saying this product is safe to place on the market, focusing your attention on double-checking everything before you pass that document on to somebody else. There's an awful lot of training that goes into it, an awful lot of toxicology, pharmacology, a little bit of pharmacy, even little bits of medicine. All these things are involved. It does take a lot of training, but as I say, it is you as an individual who personally takes responsibility for that. It isn't a faceless company. And it's often thought of as, oh, the company is placing the product on the market. They'll lose the responsibility somewhere. But it's down to the person whose name is on that document that says, I, as an individual, say this is safe to market. And it is quite an onerous responsibility.
Thank you. Question, gentleman in the pink shirt near the back.
Hi, my name is Joss, and a strange twist of fate, I'm a geologist that works at an aromatherapy company.
Okay.
And one day I was tasked...
That's really weird, because today I met a perfumer who used to work for a mining company. So, yeah, there's a strange synergy.
And please don't tell the other geologists that I'm wearing a pink shirt. I was tasked a few months ago to find out why we have to have TEA in our products. And I went and searched and whatever. And it turned out that I had to go to the Cosmetics Ingredient Review, American Society, or group of people, and read, I think, 160 pages of their review of TEA and associated chemicals. And finally, I got down to the study where the rats, female rats, got cancer because of TEA, or some of the rats got cancer. And then that study is then quoted, or then was then used as evidence why we shouldn't be using TEA in other products. But if you carried on reading, it would have stated that humans have a steroid or an enzyme that rats don't have, and that we can then metabolize TEA, and thus no problem. So I'm grateful that there are journalists here, because I think if you guys are the people who write to the consumers, but are you willing to read 147 pages? Are you willing to go, well, look, there's ambiguity here? Because I know that a consumer will then go and read our ingredient list, check TEA, latest news article, causes cancer in rats, done.
Well, I will say that my co-author, Sarah Stacey, who is an extremely respected health and beauty writer, will read the 160 pages, and that's why she won HFMA Health Journalist of the Year. And she does it so I don't have to do the 160 pages. That's the great thing about having a co-author.
I'd say it's absolutely our responsibility to get right to the end and then try and work out how we make that into 2 simple sentences, which
Absolutely.
is all we'll often
And
be allowed.
I agree as well. That's absolutely it. But the difficulty comes, and you've raised the point so brilliantly, the difficulty comes that there is just so much conflicting information out there, and you could read 160 pages and your outcome is one thing. You could read yet another study. And so really, I think with my journalism hat on, the onus is very much on your industry to actually help us. You know, we are saying, please give us the information that we need, and we would really appreciate it.
And I find myself very often writing the phrase, the jury is still out.
Me too,
on.
Me too,
you know.
Yes.
Chris would like to comment on this.
If I could, just a little bit of an advert for CTPA. It is a role we've taken on, as you know. You can come to us to find out what we believe as scientists rather than as representatives of the cosmetics industry. And we do have a website called The Facts About, where not only do we try to present the facts in a very objective manner, but we also try to get third-party views on the same issues. So it's not a case of, oh, Chris said that, but then he's paid by large company X or Y. Yes, of course, you know, somebody has to pay me, I'm not rich. But also, maybe it's breakthrough breast cancer, maybe it is the Royal Society of Chemistry, maybe it's Allergy Research UK. A number of other people will have views as well, which we will include in our summary, which I hope is very easy for members of the public to understand and is of benefit to journalists too.
It is an excellent site, I have to say.
Well,
I've used it, yes, a lot, and it is really super. It's a great resource. Thank you.
The microphone's at the back, so we'll risk going to you, Dean, again.
Yes, I'm still Dean Godfrey. Joe, you mentioned the cosmetic safety database. Is that the Environmental Working Group's Skin Deep?
Sorry?
The Environmental Working Group's Skin Deep?
Yes.
Okay. I think it ought to be made very clear that that is a complete and utter misnomer to describe that database as a safety database. I've looked at this in some detail, and my friend Colin at the front will support me in this, I'm sure. It doesn't actually give any indication of safety whatsoever. And incidentally, people are aware of the Environmental Working Group in the UK. Maybe not everyone.
The consumer isn't.
Okay, fine. And it's very confusing for the consumer to have a database in that manner, because what that database does is assess the hazard of each ingredient. That's the hazard, and going back to what was said before, hazard and dose, exposure, etc. So they only assess the hazard and give it a score between 0 and 10.
From green to red, yeah.
Yeah, but there's also 0 to 10. And so that is all they do. And they actually have a very tiny disclaimer on every page to say that they can't actually assess the safety, but they still call it the safety database. And it's not.
It is currently, as far as I know, the only go-to site for anybody about any normal person And I would like to see something that was more user-friendly, more, a genuine reflection of the sort of thing you're talking about. It doesn't exist, and that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
It's, I'd just like more transparency, more information, and more sharing going on.
But also, can I just make the point? Also, they assess. They also give a percentage data. Some ingredients have 100% data. Some have 0.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And they still give a hazard rating to things with 0 data, and the hazard rating can vary between 0 and 8. How do they assess even the hazard on the basis of 0 data? And last point on that is they even have an entry for polyparaben, which doesn't exist. And it's got a score. So really, I don't want to hammer this too much, but it's
no. But I mean, I'm not saying it is perfect. But if you are I'm not saying it's even any good. But as a consumer, it is the only place that a consumer can go.
Well, they can trust that the EU has good regulation in place and that the cosmetics out there are safe. But
I'm sorry, but I do not subscribe to the nanny state. I am a questioning consumer. There may be lots of people out there who are quite happy to be told, by the state, by their doctor, by whoever, and be reassured by that. But there are also people out there who want to ask questions for themselves. So I don't subscribe to the idea that, it must be okay because the government has looked into this. I'm sorry, but I'm just not that kind of person.
Okay. Can I while I've got the mic and be...
Right, last...
Okay, so I
We've got time for one
I will
or two
not say any more
after
this, but I just want to make one point, and I will mention parabens. Jayney, the studies you mentioned where parabens were allegedly found in breast cancer tissue, there were 2 separate studies, one in breast cancer tissue and one in normal tissue in breast cancer patients. But what was more pertinent was, in both studies, parabens were also found in the blank controls.
I did actually make that point.
Did you?
Yes.
No, you said no, blank controls didn't contain any tissue. They're 2 separate studies.
No, I did actually say that the parabens were found also in the controls. So
okay,
I'm sorry if that didn't come across.
Well, I can demonstrate
that
it's the same source of contamination in the tissue. So I'm quite happy to contact you separately on that.
Yeah.
I will shut up now, I promise.
No, it's fine.
Can I just
yes, sir. Go on.
add something to that? Actually, when the Environmental Working Group was first mentioned, I looked at you, Dean, and I'm surprised you took so long to actually come back on that one. The thought I had then, now I'm coming from a different angle. I'm not in the industry or working in any sort of regulatory capacity. But the EU does also have the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety, and that produces opinions and statements on a wide variety of ingredients. And I think there's 2 things to come out of this. The first is that actually if you sit down and read them, if you want the information, it's there, but it sometimes takes interpretation. They're not light reading sometimes. But the information is there. And secondly, if they have that information, how then can that be translated for the consumer? Should that be translated into a more consumer-friendly format?
Thank you. There's a lady up here with a question. Forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. My name's Susan Hurst. I'm a member of both the RSC and the SCS. And as a scientist, I wouldn't dream of doing a safety assessment because I don't feel personally that even with my background, I'm qualified. There are others who are specialists in this area. And I think the same could be said for a lot of people within this room. Even from a technical background, there are areas of specialism. So I think there is a danger in the media requesting an answer in black and white that I'm not sure is actually there. That a lot of this information is open to interpretation, and there is a danger that in trying to simplify it for a non-technical person to be able to understand, you actually mislead them.
That's a very, very good point.
Yeah.
And one we're very aware of.
So I would again, put the onus back to the media is to say, well, I would say there is an onus also on you to maybe to encourage your younger colleagues to actually seek out the truth and acquire the knowledge and speak to the experts who are technically qualified and able to maybe explain it to you. I think it's a two-way thing.
And then persuade our bosses that they want a slightly more complicated version of something. I just found a story this morning which has been thrown back to me now saying it's great, we want it for tomorrow morning, but it's far too complicated. You've got to say all this in really simple language. You think, what, get whole new concepts across in really simple language? That is, well, it's going to keep me busy for many hours to come this evening.
But don't you think this is one of the issues for you're saying the consumer is wanting to know? Well, part of that is actually the consumer learning.
Yes, but I do think that, as I said, that because the scientific, the cosmetic chemical industry reaching out to journalists who can be extremely lazy would be another way, a really good first step. Some kind of conference, some kind of half-day event, learn more or
Sorry,
whatever.
can I just say, you can't do it in a half a day.
Well, okay, but
it would be
anything. It would be a start. I'm not
Yeah.
saying, but but at least then they would also have some sources to turn to when they're looking for information.
Yeah. Can I just make one final plea, which is on a totally slightly different subject, but relevant to this conversation? I think somebody mentioned antibiotics earlier in their discussion, and that they're good and they're bad, and we're all starting to hear about the problems that we as a society are facing because of the misuse and overuse of antibiotics. Can I just say that I think that society is about to face this with regard to materials that are used to protect personal care products, that there has been and there continues to be an overuse, not within the cosmetics industry, but in the wider industry in terms of preservation of food, preservation of other materials, other products that are out there in the public domain that has an impact, an adverse impact on cosmetics. And it's because we actually have to label our products, that people know about it. There are so many sectors out there that are using materials that are not labelling them, but are causing a big part of the problem.
I'm all for the eat a peck of dirt before you die school myself.
On the reaching out, as Alice knows, again at CTPA we have run a number of media events where we've invited journalists, and we are certainly open to journalists in general saying, oh, I've heard about this, we'd like to come along to the next one. We try to bring an independent expert, so it's not the CTPA preaching about what the cosmetic industry thinks. We've had Professor Mark Birch-Machin from Newcastle talking about sunburnt DNA, which was a wonderful idea. We've had people talking about allergy, and it's a case of the experts have the discussion with the journalists and we facilitate it. So we're doing a little bit, and I hear that there ought to be one now on safety assessments and what it involves.
Sure, we'll be setting it up very soon.
We will.
I think, was there one more question in the middle?
Do our best to round up some of the younger journalists.
But it's getting people there, getting their time, getting them away from their desks, and a lot of the assessing whether one purple eyeshadow is better than another, which also takes up a lot of journalists' time. Thank you.
Hi, Laura Kirkbride. I'm Technical Director for a company called Oriane Personal Care. So we're what's known as a contract manufacturer. So I have no allegiance to a particular brand, no allegiance to a particular chemical supplier. My role as a formulator is to formulate products on behalf of my clients, the brands, of which I formulate both at the very high end, where I have a lot of price per kilo available in my formulations, and I also formulate at the very price-sensitive end, where I've got to be very, very selective in the ingredients I use. So as such, I just want to throw it back to the natural versus synthetic and put forward the idea that there's no right or wrong. What there is options and choices. So for any given brief, I can choose a natural or a synthetic chemical. I'm not a toxicologist, so I rely on the safety assessment that we've talked about and the toxicologist doing that part of the job once my formulation is complete and prior to it going to market. So synthetic or natural, it's an option. You've got to look at the performance of the product that you're trying to achieve. You've got to look at the price point that you're retailing it at, and also the aesthetics. And with that in mind, you come up with a formulation involving a cocktail of chemicals, of which will be a mixture of both natural and synthetic.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any comments on that? I think that sort of stands on its own as a very, as a good way to sort of wrap it all up, really. I think we've heard about everything from the hazard and how we should assess chemicals when using... one more question. Can we just take this last question here?
Hi, my name is Lauren Stoyle, and I'm a plain consumer. I don't work in the industry. I just go to the shops and buy. And as Jayney was saying, there's loads of conflicting information out. But what I find, looking deeper, is that there is always a bias as to who's against or who's pro something, depending on who's producing that information. Okay? And that is even more complicated to navigate. And I guess that my question is, if there is conflict about a certain chemical, a certain compound, first, why use it in the first place? And second, and why, generally speaking, pharma can get away with rigging information the way they do? Why there is no more close inspection as to the information that is available out there?
Thank you. Who would like to
I'll certainly
answer?
kick off.
Yeah. Thanks.
It's very welcome to hear from a plain consumer. We depend on you and all of your colleagues. In terms of, is the information biased? I hope that if you do read the facts about, you will see that we do our absolute utmost to present unbiased information, because although, as I say, the industry pays me, at the same time, I see that my science is a higher calling. And there is sometimes conflict where the industry would like to defend an ingredient, and we're saying, actually, I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do. This is not an ingredient we should continue to use. There is a mechanism which we've heard briefly about within Europe, which is the SCCS, the scientific committee that reports to the European Commission. Anybody can contact the UK authority and ask them to raise a question about an ingredient at the European level. And if there is a concern, then the Commission will ask the SCCS to investigate that chemical and come up with an opinion. It does this all the time, and if that opinion is that indeed that concern is valid, that may say the chemical should be banned, it may say that it should be restricted, or it may say actually that all those concerns are unfounded and that there isn't a problem. But this mechanism does exist, and it is independent of the industry. So we hope that that, plus the safety requirement, plus the fact that the safety assessors also have friends and families using the products, should reassure you that even if you don't have all of the information at your fingertips, because it is complex, and even if somebody hasn't distilled it down into easily digestible bite-sized lumps, you can still trust us to do the right thing for you.
I think it's really understandable that there is this huge degree of consumer skepticism, because not just in the cosmetic field, but in the pharmaceutical field as well, there have been so many notable blunders, and somebody has signed off on those studies. So there is this atmosphere of skepticism, and so it would be absolutely marvelous if somebody from the from your side of things was to actually, certainly as we said earlier, help us, but perhaps even maybe think about undertaking some PR on your own behalves to a certain degree, to actually help people to understand just what happens when you actually sign this off and turn you into a real person, as opposed to sort of almost like a faceless organisation. Not that you are, but the organisation is, it's yet another organisation, and the consumer can't relate to that. But when we know that you are real people actually putting this work in, I think it changes the perspective somewhat.
I think that's a very interesting comment, because you're right. I can't speak about pharma. I haven't worked in pharma other than as a fly on the wall for 6 months, which was fascinating. But the permission to market a product is given by government in a sense, whereas the permission to market a cosmetic is taken by the company, and it takes the responsibility for the safety on itself, and it can't turn around and say, oh, somebody else said it was okay. So if there is a problem, it's very much down to the company that has the problem, and it will be the safety assessor that's called in and said, what's going on here? How did you miss this? What's the issue?
But the scepticism comes from the fact that
nobody knows who they are. They don't see them. They can't speak to them. They don't understand the process.
Yeah. And the thing is, Chris, that obviously the consumer will look at this and say, well, the company has signed off from this, but there is a profit motive here to rush this onto the market. Has enough testing been done? So you can understand, I really have sympathy for the consumer position. I'm one of them.
Yes.
So,
If I go back to the days when I was doing the safety assessment as the day job, those pressures are real, of course. And it takes a very well-organised company to ensure that the pressure is separate from the safety group.
Absolutely.
They have to have two separate lines of management so that the pressure to get a product on the market goes that way, and the chap who decides whether it's safe or not is completely insulated from that. That's very important.
Yes.
You're right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of you on the panel. Thank you to everyone for coming along and asking so many questions. We've heard everything from about how the skin is a good barrier and the detail is and the devil is in the dose, to the consumer's concerns and a call for sort of clearer, more interpretable labelling, if there's any such word. And now it's time to all go and have a drink back through next door. So thank you once again. Thank you to the RSC. Thank you to the SCS. And you're going to wrap it up.
Just very quickly get up and say, on behalf of both societies, so the Society of Cosmetic Scientists and the Royal Society of Chemistry, thank all our panellists today for their putting some very thought-provoking thoughts to all of us and arguments. Thank you, Alice, for masterfully keeping it under control. I didn't see any blood. And thank you for keeping Dean under control, in particular, at the back. I just want to say, from my point of view, that I think everyone here is very lucky to be involved in an industry where we give a lot of happiness to people. People choose to use cosmetics. There's no such thing as a plain consumer. You're using our makeup. You're not plain. You're very important. We can actually improve people's self-esteem, and we can have a lot of fun in doing it. Nobody, no brand, no contract manufacturer, I represent ingredient manufacturers, none of us would want to harm the consumer. It's not in our interest, it's not what we want to do. And all the scientists in the room know that there are years and months of work that goes behind the production of a product. Even the fastest brand to market, which in my experience is probably Bath and Body Works, they may get a concept into market in 5 months, but the work that goes behind all that ingredients is years. So I don't want to leave the people who are listening on the internet and the people who with the impression that we do things quickly in haste because we're under financial pressure to do it. Far from it. We want you to have the best. We're one of the few sciences which are really married to creative artists. We have a lot of people who can make a sense of touch in a product, which is wonderful. You can only do that if you've got a wide portfolio of ingredients to play with, whether you want to call them synthetic, whether you want to call them natural. Our contract manufacturers, if they could do things with a very small number of chemicals, that is what they would do. But they need to have products that function, and to get the function the consumer desires, we have to come up with more and more ideas. So just want to say we're very, very lucky to be in a good, fun industry, and the debate I personally found fascinating. I'm hoping everybody on the internet has found it fascinating. Did we have any tweet and Twitter questions coming through? Or perhaps we can answer it afterwards. And I'm told that outside we've got some refreshments for everyone. So can I thank the panellists again, and thank you, Alice, for keeping it under control. Thank you all.